Greetings. This is General CJG here, coming to you with, well, our next video game review after the last one we did, which was Republic Commando. But this time, we're tackling it from the Disney Star Wars timeline. Yep, and it's one of the very best recent Star Wars games that we got then, and also a turn of events for EA of all companies. So, yep, it's Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And with me, I got here two people that have experience with this game and even history of it. So, introduce yourselves.
Very well then. Jedi Knight Luke here. How are we all, everyone? And remember, trust only in the Force.
Yep, and we also got...
Jango Fett, the macho Mandalorian.
Oh yes, he's back for this one. Yep, and we're tackling Jedi Fallen Order. I guess the big success of EA after their two disasters that was the Battlefront EA games. So that definitely was something. Okay, so without further ado, so I guess we should talk about our first experiences with Jedi Fallen Order. So who wants to go first?
I didn't know what to expect from this game. I did single player game after, the disaster with the Battlefront that broke my heart. Oh, I could trust EA after that point. But of course, later on, I think Battlefront 2 just destroyed all that, of course. But with this game, they brought back the single player formula, which even the CEO initially that, single player games don't sell, they just don't work anymore, something along that nature.
Oh yeah.
But he ate dirt because this game sold and did so great, and yeah, shit all over it. But for me, when I played it, I was like, okay, this is what I'm talking about. This is what, and from there, I was impressed, and I wanted a sequel, and thankfully we did get a sequel. But yeah, so far, back in that time, I loved it. I had a great time with it.
Nice. So is that it?
Yep.
Okay, well, Luke, you're next.
Okay, so my first experience with Fallen Order was actually it goes back to launch day. Although I did watch the initial reveal trailer when that came out following Star Wars Celebration, and I did watch the 2019 EA Play event, and of course, knowing that this game was going to be a return to form, I hoped that it would be decent because all three of us are in agreement as to how the EA Battlefronts were. And when we first got that gameplay demonstration from EA Play, that did give me some degree of hope, but of course the game was still several months away at that point. So fast forward to the game itself, and I did enjoy it. I beat it within, I think, 3 to 4 days after picking it up on launch day, and I've played it a fair number of times since, both normally and on New Game Plus, which, of course, we'll get to in due time, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Is that it?
Pretty much.
Okay. As for me, well, I first saw Jedi Fallen Order and I thought it was gonna suck because it was EA and Battlefront EA. Like it was gonna stink. Like that's what I thought. And Respawn's first project, if I recall, before the release Fallen Order was under EA because EA had already bought them by this point, and they completely shut down any support of Titanfall 2 in 2017 when they bought them. So I basically was not having any hope and or any sort of enthusiasm for whatever Respawn did. And Apex Legends, well, it was good, but it was a battle royale and not too much my cup of tea. It's definitely one of the better ones of the battle royale. So yeah. So Fallen Order shows up and I'm like, it's probably not going to be good. And I saw the gameplay and it was like, it looked kind of generic. Like it looked like very linear, just combat focused game. Like it didn't seem like those, games that would actually let you go free and explore. Like maybe not an open world, but at least something akin to, I don't know, maybe one of the Legend of Zeldas or whatever side-scrolling explorative game you can think of, like something like that. So I didn't think of it. Then the game comes out and it's getting great reviews and everything. Only issue is that it needed a bit more polish. But other than that, they say the game is pretty damn good and that it's basically a Dark Souls slash Uncharted and slash Metroid Prime. And when I heard that, I was like, really? Ah, okay, interesting. I don't know why, but a part of me didn't, or maybe did believe it. It just was not feeling too compelled to play because I did have Fallen Order for a long while, and it was free on Game Pass, so I could have played it a long while ago, but I didn't until this year, where basically I was starting on summer. I was kind of going on a Metroidvania marathon spree of sorts, where I was basically playing plenty of Metroidvania games. I was playing from the obviously the Metroid games to playing Spider-Man Web of Shadows on the DS and Shadow Dimensions also on the DS, which are Metroidvanias, to even going as far as playing Shadow Complex. I was playing several. And then I just get the idea that, hey, how about if since I'm going to Metroidvania, what would people instead of Star Wars think about doing Jedi Fallen Order? And looking at Django, like, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, okay. And so I finally played Jedi Fallen Order for this podcast for the first time. And my experience was very enjoyable. I really enjoyed it. And compared to the previous game that I played before playing Jedi Fallen Order, which let's just say Jedi Fallen Order was an absolute breath of fresh air in terms of difficulty, because holy shit, Dark Souls 3 kicked my ass hard, and Fallen Order was like child's play by comparison, even on Jedi Master difficulty. So yeah, much better experience, and it was very enjoyable, and was an awesome game. And yeah, I wanted to talk about it in this podcast. So yeah, that's pretty much it for my experience. I enjoyed it and it was great, and looking forward to talking more about it. So yeah, so shall we get guys with the summary of the story?
Well, before we get into that, CJ, I have a funny story I forgot on buying this game.
Okay.
So before I wanted to buy this game, I wanted to buy it on PC, and I was waiting for it to come out on Steam because, when I heard it was coming out on Steam, I was like, okay, it's going to be added to my Steam library, should be no problem. And waiting for it to be on the Steam page or anything, any store page of that, couldn't find it, and I was waiting for it, and then day one, it releases, and I bought it through Steam, expecting it to come out on, playing it through Steam. I found out later that it actually didn't play through Steam. You actually have to play it through EA app or whatever whatever Origin app, whatever dog shit it is. So instead of having to play it through Steam, you have to do or whatever it is. And when I found that out, I was like, well, the use of having it on Steam, then it's just bullshit. So I just hated that you had to do that, and I found out from EA games, all EA games, you have to do this. It's so stupid. So that was my experience when buying it. It was just such a rip-off when I found that out. So just now I know that you just have to buy it through the EA app instead of using the fucking Steam,
Well, I guess that's one point for the console versions, because you don't have to deal with that shit.
Yeah.
Christ, I am getting sick of companies doing that. So yeah. So yeah, so now let's get into the story. So okay, so Luke, do you want to do the summary of the story?
Okay, very well. So, when it comes to the story of Jedi Fallen Order, it centers on a young Jedi Padawan by the name of Cal Kestis. He was a Padawan during the Clone Wars who was being tutored by the Lasat Jedi Master Jara Tapal, and he and his master were training together on their Republic Venator aboard the scrapyard world of Bracca, and after, how long would you say those sessions would have been over a course of weeks, months?
Maybe, yeah.
Of learning just a few fundamental force powers, Cal, after his untimely end to his training, is summoned to the top of the training room by Jaro T'Pol, and Order 66 is issued. Cal and Jaro then attempt to fight their way through their turned clone troops and escape. However, Jaro T'Pol ultimately sacrifices himself for Cal's well-being, and Jaro T'Pol dies whilst he and Cal are escaping in an escape pod, and Cal ends up having to survive as a scrapper on Bracca for several years, which is where the game begins in present day. Cal and his friend Prof are doing just a typical run-of-the-mill job, scrapping Republic ships, when all of a sudden there's a breakage which causes a landslide, and Cal ultimately has to save Prof with the Force, but because the Empire have taken over by this point, well, an Imperial probe droid notices this act, and the Inquisitors are alerted to Cal's presence. Cal, Prof, and several other scrappers are lined up for summary execution, but in an attempt to save Cal, Prof gives himself up, and this results in Cal having to fight his way through Imperial forces on a train, and a very brief encounter with the Second Sister before he is ultimately saved by former Jedi Knight Seer Jenda, four-armed Lateran Grease Dridus, and they begin a new mission to follow in the footsteps of Jedi Master Eno Cordova and track down a holocron with a list of Force-sensitive children in an attempt to rebuild the Jedi Order.
Okay, yeah. So that's basically the summary of this story. So yeah, basically Cal has to pretty much follow in the footsteps of Eno Cordova and go to several planets. First, he of course goes to Bogano, then he goes to Cephal, then Kashyyyk, then of course Dathomir, and so yeah, like he has to explore all the several planets to pretty much be able to find a way to rebuild the Jedi Order. So yeah.
There's one more character who I forgot, which I don't know why I did. One of the most beloved droids in Star Wars at this point, and regarded by some as the best character in the game, Cal's little companion droid, BD-1.
Ah, yes. BD-1. He was definitely a great droid. So yeah. Okay, so now we can pretty much discuss the rest of the game. I'll start with saying that, would you guys believe me if I told you that originally it was going to be a BB-8 type model for BD-1?
No, I didn't know that.
Yep, the early design of BD-1 was reminiscent to that of BB-8 from sequel trilogy, but they changed it once they saw the design of BB-8 in the trailer for The Force Awakens.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, I mean, I much prefer the design of BD-1 compared to BB-8. To be honest, BB-8 just looks like a soccer ball
Great.
with an R2-D2 head. Like, that's not what it looks like. So yeah. And well, before I say what I think, so what do you guys thought of the? Well, I guess the gameplay and in regards to the game.
Overall, or are you saying like just that level of in the first half?
Yeah, we could tackle the first few levels. So Baraka, Bogano, and then Cephal. So yeah, what do you guys thought of those levels?
Bracca is a very interesting world, lore-wise, especially with the whole scrapyard aspect. But gameplay-wise, there isn't a terrible amount to say on it, because you're only on that planet for, 15-20 minutes?
Yeah.
As such, you don't spend a great deal of time there, and it's a one-time only area as far as gameplay is concerned.
Yeah, it's just a linear scripted section from getting to point A to point B. Like, and it's the only time you're there, so it's just basically on rails first time. It's kind of like the tutorial of the game, basically. So yeah. Bogano's where you really are let loose in terms of actually being able to play the game, and Bogano's where we see the game's true nature. So okay, so I mentioned in the beginning that I heard that the game was basically a mixture of Uncharted / Tomb Raider 2013 with Dark Souls and Metro Prime. Yeah, it's pretty accurate. There's no way around it. Yeah, these scripted set pieces that are so bombastic and so like scripted. Yeah, they straight up are very similar to the Uncharted sections and Tomb Raider. And it makes sense given that the director is actually a former developer from the former director of God of War 3. Yeah, from the PS3 days, and those had plenty of scripted, amazing set pieces and stuff. So yeah, stick as Musin. So yeah. But the two other inspirations are the more apparent ones than Uncharted / Tomb Raider. The next one is Dark Souls. The combat is pretty much like Dark Souls. Yes. Yes, this is just like Dark Souls, but easier. So it's much easier. And I'm pretty sure you two had no experience with Dark Souls prior to playing this game, did you?
No experience whatsoever with Dark Souls for me.
Django?
I've played maybe one for a little bit, but I just was I was turned off completely after a while. And but this one is a completely different. Oh, well, I mean, it's very similar to Dark Souls, but let's just say it's more forgiving in that aspect.
It's way more forgiving, yeah. So to prepare for this podcast, I actually played Dark Souls 3 from start to finish. Yes, I actually played Uncharted, Metroid Prime, and Dark Souls 3 to prepare for this podcast. And Dark Souls 3 kicked the ever-living crap out of my ass. Not kidding on that. It was one of the hardest games I've ever played, and one of the most unforgiving, with the insane amount of deaths, the brutal nature in terms of its progression. Like, it was just absolutely insane. And going from that to Fallen Order was like a night and day difference. Like, it was insanely different. Like, it was crazy. And I'll talk with it a bit more once I finally discuss the last influence, which is arguably the most important for this game because a lot of its design is around it, and that is Metroid Prime. Because you can change the scripted set pieces. You can remove the combat if you want. But if you try changing the level design, you pretty much, not only the level design, but also the progression and the way the story told, you pretty much completely change the game altogether. Like, you pretty much change it because the game is, from start to finish, is a Metroidvania, and not only a Metroidvania, but a 3D Metroidvania. It's basically Metroid Prime in Star Wars. Like, the level design is completely one-to-one exact copy of it, with some elements from Dark Souls, which, ironically, Dark Souls also took inspiration from Metroid before it was created. So, yeah, so it's a Metroidvania altogether. Like, you know, I'll let Luke say why it's much like a Metroidvania. Since, so Luke, go ahead.
Admittedly, I really wish I had a list of all the parallels between Fallen Order and Metroid to hand, so I could just casually rattle them off.
I'll give you some, but go with the ones that come to your mind.
The first thing which comes to mind immediately for me is the backtracking. For every major skill that you unlock in Fallen Order, as in one of your core abilities, so push, pull, the double jump,
Wall running.
Thank you, wall run. For each of those core abilities, there will be more areas and secrets that you can gain access to with each major story point that you complete. And it usually works out that every 2 major story sections or so, Cal relearns one of his core abilities.
Yep. It's basically this game's version of the main power-ups / upgrades that you get in Metroid Prime. Whereas instead of, say, getting the Morphle Bomb in Metroid Prime, you'd be getting here the wall running. That sort of stuff. It's that exact same progression. Yep. Indeed. And, yep. What other similarities come to your mind, Luke? Because I can think of plenty myself.
The fact that some of the power-ups in Fallen Order are sort of the equivalent to power-ups in Metroid. Just to give a couple of examples, the double jump being the equivalent of the space jump boots.
Because it's also double jump.
Or in Metroid, your suit evolves a couple of times. You go from the base power suit to the Varia suit to the gravity suit. And the last one is particularly notable because the gravity suit allows you complete free reign with roaming underwater. And in Jedi Fallen Order, admittedly, this is going a fair way into the game. It's probably about between 50 and 60% of the way there, to be honest. You eventually are given a underwater breather, akin to the ones that we see Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon use in The Phantom Menace, which, when you consider that it gives you full access to underwater areas, makes that basically the equivalent of the Metroid gravity suit.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, when I first saw that, I was actually surprised. Because I even thought in my mind, oh, so they got their own version of the gravity suit, just not a suit. And I like how they got very clever with managing to use elements for Star Wars while still making their own Metroid Prime-esque one type game. Like I find that so fascinating. So, yeah. And what other things come to your mind, Luke? Because to me is okay. So before Fallen Order, Luke, what, or should I say before replaying Fallen Order for this podcast, what other Metroidvanias had you played before?
Well, granted, this only just about counts, but Batman Arkham Asylum, that was really it.
Yeah, that was like the only one that you got. Django, which ones did you play before Fallen Order? Or, I guess, after?
Just Metroid Prime, the remastered.
Okay, no Batman Arkham Asylum either?
Oh yeah, I played that.
Okay. Yeah, so there's not many 3D Metroidvanias, so Fallen Order is definitely unique, because there's not many, and few hardly try doing them, so it's interesting that Respawn didn't went in that direction. It pretty much dictated the entirety of how this game was created, because like you start in, say, Bogano or Cepho, and you pretty much have to explore the areas. Now, this game is not really open world. Like, some people kind of calling it open world, but that's not true. An open world is where you pretty much can go anywhere in the big map and not be stopped by anything. There's no progression barriers. Whereas in Metroidvanias, you do get those progression barriers. You can't go here until you get, say, the double jump or the wall running, or until you get a specific upgrade. And in Jedi Fallen Order, it does exactly that same type of progression that Metroid is the one that pretty much created it. And Metroid Prime in particular, when it comes to this game, because the developers pretty much confirmed, yeah, we looked at Metroid Prime and we kind of wanted to replicate that, and they replicated almost to a T. So, yeah, so you get that type of progression, and you even get, this is something that Arkham Asylum didn't do, which this game does. It actually puts like item expansions, like for example for more health and for more whatever offensive/defensive resource you got, in this case the force. So you actually do have that, so you can actually go off the beaten path to collect small upgrades to pretty much improve your character, improve Cal. And granted, there is a skill tree in Fallen Order where you can actually invest skill points that you get from killing enemies, and you do get some more health and force like that, but it's not the only way. You actually do have to get the hidden life essence and force essence upgrades scattered across the planets in order to fully maximize your life force, your life energy, and your force energy. So you're gonna have to use both. And so yeah, so the level design is pretty much beat to beat Metroid Prime. In fact, even doubles down on it by basically having the way it tells its storytelling through not only world building, but through basically leaving this hidden, basically having BD1 scanning the creatures and any surfaces, just like the scan visor in Metro Prime. And you also have these Force Echoes that pretty much give you a small backstory of what happened before. Just like Metro Prime has those scan logs that pretty much tell you what happened before you arrived there. Yeah, the world building storytelling is pretty much exactly the same as Metro Prime. Like, the fact that it even has a scanning tool, an optional one, is like, yeah, it's mind-blowingly crazy. Like, when I saw it, it was like, and the scanning thing it's even used to unlock a few story-based parts, which, yeah, same case Prime. Like, it's just like, if you played both together, you can pretty much like see, yeah, the comparisons are pretty damn identical. Like, there's so much into it. Like, it's crazy.
Can I actually point out kind of a difference with Metroid Prime versus Fallen Order with the upgrades and the skills and what have you?
Yeah, go ahead.
So with Metroid Prime, the quote-unquote upgrades that you get are literally the core skills that you have every single one of at the beginning of the game, but then it pulls a Castlevania Symphony of the Night thing on you, where following the Frigate Orphean, all of your powers are taken away. So something that Fallen Order has, which Metroid Prime does not, is a huge skill tree, and quite the number of things in Fallen Order, as a result of having a skill tree, contribute to experience points. Scanning things in the environment, killing enemies, collecting Force Echoes. So that's there is a gameplay incentive to hunt down because you've got two different types of Force Echoes. You've got the standard ones, which contribute to XP, and then you've got those huge purple essences, which will bolster either your health or your force bar when you've collected a total of three of them. Like a total of three of them will increase your health and force essence. And how many of those upgrades are there in total? The essence upgrades.
I've heard it's 12. 12 for life, 12 for force energy.
Yeah, but because you've got all of those activities, combat, scanning, force echo, because you've got all those avenues of collecting XP in this game, there is, as I say, a far stronger gameplay incentive in this game to do those things, whereas with Metroid Prime you don't get that quite so much, because there's no upgrade tree.
This is where the Dark Souls type gameplay comes into play, because Prime, it's a first-person shooter, and typical Metroidvanias, the combat is actually on the pretty simple end. It rarely goes too deep. Prime is the deepest that a Metroid game gets, well, excluding, I guess, Metroid Dread. But yeah, so basically in Prime, you just lock on and you just shoot at the enemies. Maybe you have to switch some of the beams and visors in order to shoot at it, but that's pretty much it. It's simple in terms of FPS standards compared to the likes of, say, Halo or Doom or Unreal Tournament or Quake. So it's pretty much in that. But in the case of Jedi Fallen Order, because it's using the Dark Souls type gameplay, the gameplay that the Soulsborns are pretty much make their entire backbone of, in here you have to pretty much, if you're gonna put that type of gameplay, you need to put an incentive in order to basically make that gameplay worth it. Because if you just put enemies and they don't give you anything, that type of combat is going to be heavily discouraging for anybody to continue investing in it. They're just going to see it as a means to an end. Dark Souls and the other Soulsborne games, what they do is pretty much make it so that the enemies, they give you souls, or souls currency, whatever you want to call it, to pretty much not only level up your character, but to also buy certain goods from the stores. So that's the only way to pretty much level up. In here in Jedi Fallen Order, you only use XP to pretty much level up and get the skill tree. But it only works for the skill tree. So whereas in Dark Souls, where you only need get a few armor and just level up characters and find the Estus flasks, the healing, and some other stuff, you could technically beat that game without really needing to to maybe level up or maybe get everything if you're a hardcore Dark Souls player, that is. But in the case of the Metroidvanias, Metroid Prime, you need to get in the explorative side in order to have the resources to fight the enemies. You know, the energy tanks and the missile expansions. In Fallen Order, it's a mixture of both, because not only do you need to fight the enemies to, you know, unlock the specific moves and improvements with the skill tree, but you also need to explore to get not only the force echoes and the life echoes, but to also get the steam upgrades, you know, to actually get healing steams. Because just as in Dark Souls, where you use the Estus Flask to heal yourself in the middle of combat, and here you get the equivalent with the health steams that BD1 throws at you. So it pretty much took that exact element from Dark Souls, and you need to find them in the maps in order to pretty much be able to survive more encounters. So it takes elements from both Dark Souls and Metroid Prime, but there's more of Metroid Prime into it, and since Dark Souls level design was pretty much inspired by Metroid, it all goes together. Yeah, a large chunk of the backbone from this game is from Metroid. So, but yes, it uses elements from both Dark Souls and Metroid Prime. The exploration and the progression is Prime, and the combat is Dark Souls. So, and yeah, so I gotta ask you guys. So, what do you think of the combat here compared to any other games that you played? Not just Metroidvanias, but I guess other combat games. Hell, you can even compare to previous Star Wars games too. So, what do you guys think? I'll go with you, the Django, first.
So when I first saw the gameplay, I wasn't really, and I guess when I first started playing it, I wasn't really impressed because I didn't feel like a powerful Jedi. But the thing is, that's the thing, you're not a powerful Jedi. You're kind of starting over from there, and you're growing as you play through the game. So the expectation of having this game to be like something like what was it, like Jedi Knight, any of those games, I mean, that's just, if you had that expectation when looking at this game, then go just play those games, because we're probably not going to get something like that maybe in the future, who knows, but something as badass and awesome where you feel like just an overwhelmingly powerful Jedi. But this is like a completely different game. But I did enjoy it. I did like the gameplay. It does feel a lot like Dark Souls, but easier to handle and not so frustrating. And you grow as when we mentioned the Metroidvania elements, you're growing as you go along, because you have pretty much not that many abilities. But then as you go to world and discover new abilities along the way, and you discover new things from your past, like, oh, I remember this and that, as you progress through the story. And then with using the Metroidvania elements, you actually go back to Bogano or other worlds like that you couldn't access for those certain elements, and then you apply those abilities. And that's what makes it addicting about this game and the future game, to go back and discover new things and new rewards and new enemies and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's always been one of the biggest selling points for Metroidvanias. It's always been to, when you get a new upgrade, you want to try it out either for exploration or for combat. And yeah, it usually is more for the exploration, because Metroidvanias are typically explorative. They're the main focus. If you don't have that element nailed, and the whole game pretty much could fall off. So I do think it was the right call for them to definitely nail that down and then focus on like the combat and stuff. Assuming they did start with the level design first before. I think so, considering that if you remove the Metroid Prime element from this game, you pretty much change the whole game. Because yeah, you can keep the combat, you can keep the scripted set pieces, but the way the game, the world building and the storytelling goes would be pretty much different. Like you wouldn't have a story reason to go back to Cepho and then go to Kashyyyk again if that Metroidvania DNA was not there. Like you pretty much be like, yeah, you go to Bogano, then you go to Cepho, then Kashyyyk, and then go to Dathomir immediately. Like you wouldn't be backtracking to these areas at all. You wouldn't even have any reason to go back to Cepho. You just get the Astrium in one of the last worlds, and then just go back to Bogano, and that's pretty much it. Like the backtracking would be so minuscule that there'd be no reason to go back to, and you wouldn't be seeing stuff like, for example, where you backtrack to Cepho, where you fight the second sister, like you encounter. There wouldn't be any reason to put that there in the story, because the design is not like a Metroidvania. Instead, you probably fight her in like Kashyyyk, or maybe even Dathomir or something, like it would change everything if the game was not a Metroidvania. Like you change it entirely. Like how the plot goes is dictated by how the level design and the progression is. So it would change everything. And Dathomir in the game, you can pretty much go to it in the first, like you can pretty much go right to it once you finish Pagano. You can go to Sepho or Dathomir, and if you want to go to Dathomir, you can go there, and you could get the double-bladed lightsaber early on, but you cannot finish a map because you need the Jedi flip, and you get that in Kashyyyk. But you can't get Kashyyyk until you get to Sepho, and you need to get the main powers in there to go to Kashyyyk and to have Kashyyyk unlocked, and then get the Jedi flip there. So you pretty much would not even had a chance to go to Dathomir if the story was paced more like your typical, say, Uncharted type game, or if it was something like that, you'd be basically, if it was as linear as whatever any linear type game doesn't really give you the freedom to explore, like it would be pretty much just basic generic, just the main appeal would be just the combat. And if people don't like the Dark Souls type combat, yeah, they wouldn't really like this game that much, because there wouldn't be that other second element in it, the exploration. Yeah, so Luke, so what do you think of in regards to this game, in regards to the combat?
Compared to pretty much any saber combat Star Wars game that has come before, this game is very much a departure from that, with the Souls influence. However, given the story that the game tells and Cal's skill level, I think it makes complete sense that the combat style is the way that it is. And actually, Django kind of touched on it already, but do you mind if I further elaborated a bit on the Force powers?
Yeah.
Because, as Django said, if you're expecting Jedi Knight, Jedi Outcast, Jedi Academy levels of Force variety and intensity, you're not going to get that here. And I actually do want to address that head on, because when this game came out, people did complain about the lack of Force abilities, not the upgrades that you can get in the skill tree, but Cal's actual pool of core abilities that he has. And people complaining, oh, where's Force Grip? Where's Force Lightning? Where's the Jedi Mind Trick? Where's this or that? It's like, people, Cal, in case anyone isn't aware, and this is kind of spoiling things in terms of the sequence of events, but the summary of the story I gave early on in this discussion, yeah, those segments with Padawan Cal and Jara T'Pol, those are flashbacks in the context of the story as you experience it, where Cal will remember the core abilities that he learned. And the flashbacks make it crystal clear that he is a neophyte Padawan who was just beginning to learn the ways of the Force. It does not make sense that he would have this immense, varied pool of abilities, and it certainly doesn't make sense that he would have access to some of the more advanced Force abilities, which in the context of the greater Star Wars lore, Mind Trick, for example, is one. And then, of course, Grip, Lightning, all the dark side Force powers. He's a Jedi. Most Jedi don't use those. So it's very unfair and kind of short-sighted to judge the game for things that it gives valid reason for right in front of your face.
Yeah, indeed. When I played Fallen Order, I definitely, well, I did not compare it to previous Star Wars games. Well, in a way, it kind of did, but I knew right off the bat this was not going to be any of those. It was not going to be like the Jedi Knight games or the Force Unleashed. It was going to be basically like pretty much Star Wars' equivalent of Dark Souls. Though some have said that it's actually a bit closer to Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, because that game is very parry dependent, in which you have to pretty much use the parry button very always have to parry a large chunk of attacks in order to pretty much be successful. In Dark Souls, you can parry, but it's not the main focus. You usually are rolling and evading enemies. And whereas in here, you do both, basically. Like, you pretty much can parry a good chunk of attacks, but when the specific enemy flashes red, that's an unblockable attack, so you have to actually get out of the way. So in that sense, Fallen Order actually did better than Dark Souls, because it actually has a more crystal clear tell where, yeah, this attack is not blockable, so get out of the way. Whereas in Dark Souls, it was so goddamn difficult to tell which attacks you could parry and which you couldn't. In fact, it was so bad that I literally was like, I'll just roll around and just debate at this point. I hardly will ever parry anything with the shield or the sword, because it was very insane trying to parry. Like, it rarely was doing any effect, any help, and if anything, it was just draining the stamina bar. Which, oh yeah, speaking of that, thank the Lord, thank Hylia, that literally there's no stamina bar here that consumes for every single action you do. Yes, you do have a stamina bar for when you're blocking attacks, but that's it. You do not have to use it for running, you do not have to use it for dodging, or for anything else, because in Dark Souls, you have a stamina bar that literally drains for any action you do, whether it's running, rolling, like, or even swinging the sword, and even using the shield. Like, the stamina bar in Dark Souls governs everything. Like, literally, even just a simple, like, even just missing one of your swings can literally mean the life of death for you. Whereas in Jedi Fallen Order, that's not the case. If you fail a swing, you can just pretty much roll out and be away on skates. So there's so much more leeway in here compared to Dark Souls. And because, okay, I gotta ask you guys, if this game had a stamina bar that covers everything, how would you feel if that was here in this game and the sequel? How would you feel?
I would personally hate it. I wouldn't like it. I think the force bar is enough as it is to keep track of, and your health. Adding stamina would just be... I think it would just add too much. I wouldn't like it.
Look?
You'd be pretty much helpless from the get-go, wouldn't you? Because, you know, the first major combat sequence in this game is Cal fighting through Imperial forces on that train on Braca. And if there was an all-in-one stamina bar here, like there is in Dark Souls, you'd be pretty much screwed, wouldn't you? In fact, here's a question for you, General. Something that Fallen Order is nice enough to have with those stamina bars. So Django made mention of how the force bar is something you have to keep track of as you do your stamina bar with blocking. The blocking bar refills automatically, and depleted force energy you can easily replenish by just killing enemies.
Or even attacking them, actually. Not necessarily killing them, just attacking them.
Does Dark Souls even have that degree of generosity where hurting enemies refills that stamina bar?
No. It refills by itself, but in order to do that, you literally have to, like, just not do anything or just walking. Even having the shield or your sword blocking, like on blocking stance, it literally slows down the regeneration of the stamina. You literally have to, like, just straight up not be blocking, not be attacking, not be rolling. You just either standing up or just walking normally for it to let it refill. Like, pretty much at the mercy of whatever attacks.
And when you are idle or walking in Dark Souls, does that stamina bar refill as quickly as Fallen Order's blocking bar does?
Fallen Order's bar is a bit faster.
Well, so Fallen Order really is more forgiving in that aspect.
Not only that, but in Dark Souls, you can use an item to pretty much make the stamina bar feel faster, but you're still at the mercy of it. So, whereas in Fallen Order, it really is much more forgiving. Though, there is one thing that Dark Souls did do better than Fallen Order. I know, shocker, but yeah. And this is one that I don't get, and I hope to God the sequel remedies it. So, okay, just as in Dark Souls, Fallen Order has its meditation points, which act as basically this game's version of the bonfires. Whereas in Dark Souls, the bonfires, if you interact with it, you can pretty much refill your health and everything, and even save the game. And yes, it respawns enemies when you interact with it. So just as in Dark Souls, in Fallen Order, the meditation points do the same, though with some differences. You actually enter the meditation point and you can you can just choose to interact with skill tree instead of having to, always rest. But if you choose to rest, you not only get your health and health steams back, but you also and force energy, but you also respawn all the enemies, just like in Dark Souls. And yeah, so it has the meditation points there. But the one thing that the bonfires do, which Fallen Order's meditation points don't, and it is a big one, is that in Dark Souls, the bonfires are used as fast travel locations. You can pretty much fast travel from one bonfire to the next, and whatever you want. In Fallen Order, you cannot do that with the meditation points. Like, you straight up can't. And that means that that backtracking from where you are in, say, Sepho or Kashyyyk, all the way to the beginning of the ship is absolutely mandatory. You pretty much have to do it. And that is, not a good design. They should have made it, at the very least, you could fast travel back to your ship, but no, it's not the case here. And it's a big one, because, okay, I get it, Respawn. I get it that Metro Prime doesn't have that, because Metro Prime does not have any fast travel locations. It has shortcuts with the elevators and certain rooms that you can pretty much use to pretty much cut path from later into the region to the beginning. I get that. Metro Prime did it, and Dark Souls actually does that too, where you can actually open like a door or something and get like a shortcut unlocked, which of course it took it from Metro, because Metro has shortcuts, and in Fallen Order it does that shortcuts too, so you unlock the shortcuts. But the lack of fast travel is a big problem, and it was my one major criticism from Fallen Order from my entire gameplay, especially because when I wanted to backtrack to get more life essences and force essences and the stim upgrades, it definitely was a bit of a problem, and I wish I didn't have to do all the backtracking back. And now in Prime, I can excuse it to some extent for not having to fast travel, because not only the sequels, Primes 2 and 3, actually did include fast travel in some way, so they fixed that issue, but also in Prime 1, it's a much shorter game compared to Fallen Order. And it also doesn't have the Dark Souls combat, which means that you can actually breeze through most enemies and not have to deal with them and lose too much health, whereas in Fallen Order, not the case. So I excuse the lack of fast travel in Prime, because it's actually easy to get around it, and the shortcuts do help a lot. But in Fallen Order, I can't really excuse it. And the devs actually did have one reason for why they did it, and they pretty much said the main reason why they didn't put any fast travel is because, in their own words, they basically said that a lot of the game is retraversal and exploration. Not having fast travel encourages the player to go off the beaten path, find quick routes, and master the level. Also, as you play through, you see some stuff that you wouldn't if you fast travel to the critical path every time. And
So, CJ, I can tell you right now, if they fix that, all your complaints for the meditation points, well, they did that. They fixed it all for Jedi Survivor. Everything you mentioned you wanted to see, they did it all in Jedi Survivor.
Hallelujah. Yes, thank God they fucking did it.
Plus, when you can choose to rest whenever you want to and still go through your skill points whenever you feel like it. At any point, you don't have to rest while you're doing that.
Oh, that you could already do in Fallen Order. So yeah, but the fast travel was completely gone from Fallen Order. It was not there. So
yep, that's all fixed.
Oh, thank hallelujah. Luke, what do you think of that?
That's incredibly incredibly comforting to know, actually, because and I don't think this is I don't think this is delving into spoiler territory too much, but I know for a fact that Jedi Survivor is a much bigger game than Fallen Order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how is the game in terms of content, the Django Survivor, compared to Fallen Order?
It's like double the content.
Oof.
So the time, like I was just looking at the playtime for Fallen Order, and I was doing all the collectibles and stuff, and I think I put like 25 something hours, and then the Survivor, let me just check right now. I put like almost 52 hours.
Holy shit!
Oh,
It's not like
double.
every single collectible, but it's a good amount. Yeah.
Oh damn.
So currently that's just over double your Fallen Order playtime for Survivor, and that's still not everything.
Yep.
Whoa.
So for a game, and Fallen Order should have had it from the get-go, as you say, General, the fast travel with the meditation points. But if Survivor didn't have that, that would be a whole other issue,
Yeah.
given how big that is.
Yeah, it reminds me of Prime 2, where they basically, the sequel, I wouldn't be surprised if they took inspiration from that game 2 and 3, especially 3 when it comes to, using the ship to go to planets. That's something you do in Prime 3. But I wouldn't be surprised if they took inspiration from, because in Prime 2, basically you not only have one planet to explore, but you have also the alternate version of it, Dark Aether. So you have to explore both planets, and that makes Prime 2 the longest of the 3 Prime games, and also the hardest one. And they have the shortcut elements and everything, but backtracking can still be a problem, especially for the last thing the game puts you through, which Primes 1 and 3 are also doing, which it's another thing the Fallen Order has over Metro Prime, which I'll get to in a bit. So yeah, if you didn't have any sort of fast travel, which they give it to you at the very end when you have to do that last item fetch quest, then you pretty much would have been a problem, because so yeah. And okay, so this is one thing I'll absolutely give credit to Fallen Order for not replicating from the Prime games. Even though I don't mind it too much in the first game, I kind of dislike it in the second game, and the third game I think is the best. Okay, so in the Prime trilogy, basically the developers, Retro Studios, decided to make this item fetch quest hunt that you have to do at the end to access the final area, the final boss. And in the Prime 1 is the Choso artifacts, Prime 2 is the Sky Temple keys, and Prime 3 is the energy cells. And yeah, okay, what would you guys feel if, say, Fallen Order decided, in order to access the last area, you need to backtrack to Bogano, Cepho, Kashyyyk, and Dathomir, and get like 3 holocrons for every single one of those regions. Those holocrons that were not available before you even tackled those planets for the first time. They're only available after you already finished Dathomir. And you need to backtrack to get those holocrons to access the last area. How would you guys feel if that happened in there?
Well, I would probably have just thrown my game case across the room.
Pretty sure both of you have tackled the Choso artifacts in Metro Prime, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, how was collecting those?
It was not too bad, but it was still like it was a little too much. It just took a while in the end.
Look.
I have only made a start on it, and it was something that I stumbled upon by accident, and I know for a fact I'm not too far from the point where collecting the Choso artifacts in Metroid Prime is mandatory. Oh, what fun that's going to be.
Yeah, so I can definitely give a lot of praise for Fallen Order for not replicating that from the Prime games, because plenty of people dislike the item fetch quest in the Prime trilogy. With the one I think is the worst is Prime 2, because you can't even start collecting the keys in Prime 2 until like you're halfway into the game. Like you can't even start at the beginning like you could in Prime with the Choso artifacts. So it's definitely, I do strongly commend Respawn for not doing that. And I'm gonna ask you right now, the Django, Jedi Survivor, does it not do this? Does it not do an item fetch quest at the end?
No. You don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
Oh, thank God.
Thank the highly, yeah. Because, yeah, oh Christ. Yeah, so I give massive credit to Respawn. They definitely pulled the plug on when it came to replicating Metro Prime, because, yeah, they replicated a lot from that game in Fallen Order, like so much of it. So I'm glad they didn't take the worst aspect of the Prime games, which, while I don't mind the Choso artifacts, there are a few times that I actually like collecting them to get 100%. I know most people don't really like it, especially the people that just want to play casually and just want to get to the end of the game. So only completionists are the ones that don't mind the Choso artifacts and the collectibles, but those that are not completionists, yeah, they will struggle. So if Fallen Order Survivor replicated that shit, it would have been a problem. I probably think a lot of people would be like, the second half of the game is the worst part. I hate it. If they had included something like that. So I'm happy with that. They didn't add that. Yeah, and that's something. And something that I want to ask you guys. So now let's talk about the bosses. So what do you guys thought of the bosses in Jedi Fallen Order?
So there aren't an insane amount of bosses in Fallen Order. you have a very small handful of major bosses, and you also have a fair number of mini bosses. So, are we speaking strictly about the major bosses, or are we counting the mini bosses in here too?
You can go with talking about both.
Okay. I'll start off with the mini bosses first, actually. So the mini bosses in Fallen Order range from creatures to bounty hunters. So the creatures will be the alpha variant of a certain planet's native species. So, for example, on Bacano, you've got these Gronkle from How to Train Your Dragon looking creatures called Ogdos, and the alpha Ogdo on Bogano is called the Ogdo Bogdo, which is in the sinkholes, and that's the creature that General I know you have a fair amount of experience with.
Those guys are annoying. Yeah, but they're not as bad as Dark Souls 3 bosses. Don't be surprised if I'm literally saying not as bad as Dark Souls 3. Don't be surprised, viewers.
Okay, so you may not, you may be able to wipe away the Ogdos and the Ogdo Bogdo, but on Zepho, there are these creatures known as the Jotaz, and they have an alpha variant known as the Rabbit Jotaz. What do you have to say to those?
They gave me trouble in the first 1-2 times, but later I beat them. And none of the bosses in Fallen Order made me die more than 4 times. Like, the highest I got was 4 times. It never went to 5 times. Whereas Dark Souls 3, the first boss killed me 5 times before I even killed him. And then other bosses, it ranged from either dying once, or dying 4 or 5 times, or 6 times. 1-2 bosses, I didn't die, but that's because I pretty much was able to absolutely deal with them. So yeah, but it wasn't easy. So yeah, Dark Souls 3, like when it comes to bosses, it's all over the place in terms of how I go. Either I die a lot, or I don't die too much, or I die a lot. Yeah, that's how much it is. With Fallen Order, I consistently was able to get from 0 to 3 deaths, like in average. Maybe one time I got 4 deaths. But in terms against bosses, consistently didn't take me too much time or too much trouble. So I was able to deal with them. But of course, let's just say that, I mean, it's still Dark Souls combat, so don't expect it to be easy. And okay, I played it on Jedi Master difficulty, which still was not as difficult as Dark Souls 3. It's the second highest difficulty. Look, in what difficulty did you play?
Jedi Knight, which is the normal difficulty.
Okay. Django, what difficulty do you usually play Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor? Is it also Jedi Knight, or you go for Jedi Master?
So Fallen Order, I played, I think, normal, and then I think later, I think I just stuck with normal. Fallen Order.
There are 4 difficulties. There's a story mode, Jedi Knight, Jedi Master, and Grand Jedi Master. Jedi Knight being normal, basically.
Yeah, that's what I played through. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Luke played Jedi Knight, and I played Jedi Master. Yeah, suffice to say, Dark Souls 3 absolutely hardened me, and Jedi Master was child's play by comparison.
Actually, before just continuing on with the bosses, General, where would you estimate the Haxian Brood come in? Is it about halfway through?
Are you talking about the gladiatorial mercenaries from that arena?
Yes. From the end of your second visit to Zepho.
They basically, you finish what you gotta do there in Zepho, and then you pretty much you get captured, and then you pretty much have to escape into the arena, and then you kill all the enemies in there. Then basically, of course, you escape and you get all the bounty hunters chasing you across the galaxy. So it's like in the middle of the game, if you ask me. Yeah, in the middle. It's pretty much in the middle.
Yeah. And so at the end of your second visit to Zepho, regardless of which way you go in an attempt to get back to the Mantis, you are stopped mid-journey by a bounty hunter. And it doesn't matter how well you perform against the bounty hunter, they will do an unblockable attack that binds you, and then they knock you out. and then you reawaken inside a prison, which you can very easily get yourself out of, and then they literally give your lightsaber back to you once you enter the arena. I mean, talk about stupid villains.
Well, they wanted to see you fight, so yeah. And yeah, we were discussing the bosses. So, Django, what do you think of the bosses in Fallen Order and how they compare to Survivor, I guess?
So in comparison, there's a lot that Jedi Survivor does better, as to be expected for a sequel, compared to Fallen Order, including the combat, the different things you can do with the combat, force abilities, and the bosses as well. So there's a lot of enemy variety in Jedi Survivor, and a lot of bosses. But I would say it's definitely better in Jedi Survivor, and there's actually like secret bosses that you can fight from Fallen Order that are pretty challenging at times. So I'm just gonna say that.
Huh. It reminds me of Dark Souls 3, where actually there are some bosses that are optional. I guess they delve into that one. Yeah. Before you're wondering, no, there's no hidden secret bosses in the Metroid games. Well, some of them, in the 2D games, some of them are, but in the Prime games, no. Actually, Prime 3 does have some optional bosses now I think about it. In particular, the Metroid Hatchers in Prime 3. So, and in Prime 2, there's this one Dark Trooper that you beat. So, I mean, but then again, secret bosses is nothing new to gaming, so it's cool to have them. But Dark Souls definitely loves its bosses. It just loves it. And Fallen Order, it pretty much just took the blueprints from that and decided to make their own thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also there is, I don't know if you guys heard about this live stream that happened with a certain person who played Jedi Survivor. And they spent, I don't remember the time, but they spent like a whole like night, like 8-10 hours. I don't even know how long that stream was. But this guy was trying to spend so much time trying to beat this certain boss, secret boss, and it was two of these frog enemies at one time, and he could not do it. So he did it for like hours upon hours, and then he finally did it. And I remember doing that and actually fighting it. I was like, no, well, actually, when I was seeing that clip, I was like, I'm not gonna fight this until the very end of the game, and that's what I did. And then I just waited till close to the very end, when I was even more powerful, and through a lot of grit, I beat it within like the second or third time fighting it. Yeah. So, in comparison to that guy who died like a million freaking times, and I don't know what his progression was, but I thought that was funny.
Yeah, so note to self for those that are starting a Dark Souls type game, definitely get as much items as possible and get that XP as much as possible if you're going to play Fallen Order and Survivor. And since this is more of a Metroidvania, also get those Life and Force essences because they're going to come in handy, and those Stim upgrades. So
yeah,
the biggest
you definitely get a bunch of Stim upgrades if you can. But the thing is, the boss enemies these secret boss enemies will have those stim ones. So it makes it more enticing to just want to go after them to get those extra stims, because that's like,
oh wait,
that's their backbone.
Wait, really?
You know?
So unlike Fallen Order, where the stims are just in these yellow crates, in Survivor you actually have to fight bosses to get them?
A few of them, quite a few of them. Yeah, not all of them, but there's a certain, and you can find like certain areas if you like get a certain force ability or something. Then you can find these areas and, get that whenever. But yeah, certain bosses will have it.
Oh, wow.
So it makes it more enticing.
Wow, that's something, yeah. And yeah, so Luke, thoughts on this?
I'm always in some health stims in Survivor being hidden by way of secret bosses.
Yeah.
This is news to me. I didn't know about that. I thought it was all down to the crates again, the golden crates, like it is in this game.
Well, sounds like no. It's actually more than that.
There's like certain secret bosses that have it, but also regular bosses. I can't just spoil which one it is, but
okay.
Like some bosses will have regular bosses.
Okay. On the subject of health, there are actually a couple of things regarding the combat that we missed.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those things, General, you mentioned, but I think it should be given at least a little bit of zoned-in discussion here. the double-bladed lightsaber,
Ah, yes.
which you can get as an upgrade. Well, actually, you can get it as an upgrade earlier, very early in the game, has been all said, if you visit Dathomir long before you're supposed to, and find the specific workbench that has the upgrade. And it plays very differently, as you'd expect, but still, to the single saber. The saber staff is a lot more about defense and crowd control.
Mm-hmm.
And my advice would be, don't make the saber staff your primary weapon of choice until you unlock the delay attacks, which are the delay thrust and delay combo. You can buy those in the skill tree, which basically allow your main attacks, your main saber attacks, to do more damage with the saber in both modes, for the lack of a better word. And something else that we haven't discussed yet in regards to the combat, and health does play into this in a way, is the punishment you suffer should you die.
Ah, yes. Okay, so yeah. So just like in Dark Souls, if you die, you lose your souls, and you have to pretty much go back to where you lost them and get them back. Now in Dark Souls, you just have to get there and pretty much just touch the green orb in there that holds your souls, and you can pretty much get it. Just press A and you got them. In Fallen Order, it's different. In there, if the enemy kills you, your XP is pretty much stored in that enemy. So to get it back, you need to basically just attack the enemy, like land a successful attack, and you pretty much get it back, as long as getting your life and force restored. But I realized actually in my playthrough that you could technically actually get the XP just floating around in the area that you died. Like if you say you died from falling damage or something, and yeah, you can pretty much get it there like if it was freaking Dark Souls. So it is similar to Dark Souls, but it also has its twist when it comes to being killed by enemies. So it's pretty much, it's interesting. So yeah, what do you guys think of that mechanic?
It's a very useful mechanic when exercised in the right way. For example, if you're in a combat scenario and an enemy kills you, you can prioritize the other people in the group of enemies first, and say you've taken some damage in an attempt with dealing with that group of enemies, and you save the guy who killed you previously for last. You can strike them when they're vulnerable and replenish all of your health and force energy. And do you get used stims back when you take your force essence or life essence back? I forget.
No, that never happened to me. No.
Okay, so it's just health and force. So there is some degree of a tactical advantage with that mechanic.
It's actually another thing that makes Fallen Order more forgiving than Dark Souls, because in Dark Souls you just get your souls back, but in here you not only get your XP back, but you also get life and force back, so it can be used more strategically and also to give you a leg up if you need to, in order to pretty much beat whatever enemy that killed you before. So it helps, yeah. Because in Dark Souls, no, you just get the souls and that's it. So literally just going for the souls there, you have to do it either at a time where you got plenty of leeway to get it, or after being the boss. But here's the thing, if you die and you don't get the souls in Dark Souls, you lose that amount of souls. So if you got like say 100,000, yeah, they are going away if you die a second time. And the second time you die, the amount of souls you got from that death is the one that spawns there. So basically, you have to get the souls that you lost in Dark Souls, because if you die again and you don't get them, those souls are gone. In Fallen Order, same thing happens. If you lose the XP, if you don't get the XP before you die, you pretty much lose that XP too. So same thing happens. So Fallen Order is a bit more forgiving with giving you health and force back if you manage to strike the enemy. Dark Souls not so much. So it's slightly better, but still pretty painful if you die again and don't get the XP back. So yeah. Anyway, Luke, you were saying?
So yeah, I just wanted to say that. And then just very quickly in regards to the weapons with single saber versus a double blade. What do you guys prefer out of the two?
So in Fallen Order, I think I liked the double bladed a lot more. Just because of the crowd control and I think it was faster at the time than it is a single blade. And you could, I mean, against blaster bolts, it's pretty great as well too.
In my case, I actually was swapping back and forth. Double-bladed, I used it whenever there were multiple enemies easy to kill. However, the thing is, once I got the next lightsaber upgrade, which was the heavy attack with the two blades, it was where I was swapping between regular and double-bladed because... Okay, well, later in the game, you get from one planet, you get a specific upgrade. This comes after getting double-bladed lightsaber. Well, basically, you now use two lightsabers, but there's no there's no using two hands lightsaber style. No, it's more like you're using a single-bladed or double-bladed, and basically you press one button to do a heavy attack, which basically makes it so that you get the second lightsaber out, and you pretty much do the heavy attack. With the double-bladed lightsaber, if I recall, you basically do it so that you split the saber in two and you do one big slash attack. Whereas in the single one, you turn on the other lightsaber and you do a barrage of flurry attacks. So it's two different ones. One is a heavy attack, one is like a flurry of light attacks. So that's what I recall how it was.
Yeah, so starting off as a single blade, dual blade whirlwind. If you already have it activated as a double blade, it's a vertical slash. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So that's pretty much how it is. So I was swapping between both because of that, the heavy attack with the two blades. So that's pretty much how I went. However, there were times where I actually used the double bladed lightsaber a bit more because the slashing attacks were faster. But against bosses, I actually was swapping between the two because sometimes the double-bladed lightsaber was definitely getting the several attacks, but when it came to blocking and parrying, it actually ended up being a bit easier with one lightsaber because I could pretty much have the saber more ready in defensive stance compared to double blade. It was a bit odd that happened, but yeah, I was swapping back and forth between the two, so it really depended on the situation. So I don't know how it went with you two guys. Django, you already said you prefer double blade lightsaber. Luke, which one do you prefer more?
There is a bit of a bias, I must admit, towards the single blade for me, just because it is the simpler style. However, from a gameplay perspective in this game, especially in the latter part, like when you got the double blade, which will actually bring me back to the bosses in just a second, I found myself in a lot of cases with the later boss fights using the double blade more, just for aesthetic purposes, if nothing else. Because it's like, oh, you've pulled out the dual blades, so will I.
I actually did that with the Ninth Sister at one point, where basically that boss, he was like just one blade, and then the cutscene happens like, no, I have two, and I was like, oh, you got one? Well, guess what? I got two as well.
Yeah, and I did that. I've done that most of the time. I think with fighting the Ninth Sister, I've definitely done it most, if not all the time, with a certain someone who we'll get to soon. And in the later boss fights with an already familiar place. But again, can't discuss those without going into spoilers. So going back to the bosses, so we pretty much covered the mini bosses, I think. So saber bosses, you already started going into it, General, but the Ninth Sister.
Yeah.
So what type of boss would you say she is? Like, is she the equivalent of anything from Metroid or Dark Souls or?
Oh, Dark Souls all the way. All the major bosses are fucking Dark Souls bosses, all the way. Yeah, because, see, the bosses in Metroid Prime, they rely on you, basically. They rely more in terms of you actually figuring out their weaknesses and killing them. Whereas in Dark Souls, you actually just have to pretty much be on your guard with your shield and your sword and absolutely be rolling around, dodging their attacks and striking when you got the chance. So in Fallen Order, it's pretty much that, because there's no like oh, you need to figure out, you need to use this certain ability to pretty much beat this boss or something like that. No, maybe there's one, but no. In here, you have all the bosses where you have to absolutely just be on your guard and persevere in the battle and pretty much be able to hit it when you can. So it's more like Dark Souls than it is Metroid Prime. So I don't know how the bosses are in Jedi Survivor. So the Django, how are they in Survivor compared to Fallen Order?
Okay, so Jedi Survivor definitely has a wide range of bosses and definitely more challenging, especially towards the very end. A very, very fast boss that you'll have to deal with. So there is plenty of variety, and I don't remember. Jedi Fallen Order has quite a few, but nothing as iconic or memorable as in Jedi Survivor, I would say.
I see. The bosses in Survivor, they only require you to pretty much be parrying and dodging and attacking, right? There's nothing like you need to use a specific ability or something against them, or do you?
No, I mean, it's all about timing and watching their movements, pretty much. I will say the one that really bothered me is a really, really fast one, and I just could not figure that one out. So I just ended up just, let's say, cheating my way into that, and just to beat him, because I was just so frustrated with that one.
Okay. Well, then in that case, there isn't much change with Survivor. Yeah, so, alrighty. Well, then I guess that's for the bosses. And, well, shall we now get into... Let's basically go down now to the end of the game. So we can pretty much now talk in full detail of it unrestrained. So, Luke, shall you do the honors of saying what happens once you finish your first visit to Dathomir? Like, legit one?
Yes. So after a very, very, very long fought battle through the inhabitants of Dathomir, you eventually make it to... Is it Kujit's tomb on Dathomir?
That's what it is.
Yeah, it is Kujit's tomb. Okay. So, yeah, you have a very long, hard-fought battle through the inhabitants of Dathomir, including... Oh, I've completely forgotten the name of it. The Dathomir Bat, which I believe was a completely original creature for this game.
Yes. Oh, that freaking bad bastard. Okay, so yes, there is this. It's called a Chirodactyl. And yes, it first came out here. So known as the Dathomirian Bats. So this fucker. So basically, this is this game's version of the first big boss, if I recall, before facing the next boss. So yeah, basically you have to fight it. So yeah, and by the way, that bat, if you literally took it out from this game and you put it in Dark Souls, it will feel right at home. I'm not kidding, because it looks so much like a Dark Souls boss, and it fights like one too. So yeah, it's one-to-one a complete heavy inspiration from that to bring it here. It's crazy. Hell, even does the game even does something that Dark Souls does, where it basically teases the boss, or at least one of the big bosses, optional or not, like somewhere in the background. Like basically just putting there, like somewhere that you can see from far away. You're not fighting it, but when you get to the battle, you actually fight it and you see it. Here, it does the same, from not only randomly seeing it just floating around, but there's one point that actually attacks some of the Night Brothers, and it pretty much flies away and pretty much goes in its own way, and then you fight it yourself. So yeah, I pretty much took that exact same element from freaking Dark Souls and put it here, which that's mind-blowing if you ask me. It's pretty goddamn crazy. So yeah.
So as I say, an incredibly long, hard-fought journey through Dathomir's environment and battling the inhabitants, the Night Brothers, the Night Axe, the spiders that shoot poison at you, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And eventually you make it to Kujit's tomb. You interact with Cal's psychometry on the door, and nothing happens. But then you enter. A meditation point appears, and when you exit that meditation point, you are transported to the Order 66 flashback, which I spoke about early on in the summary of the story. And after that flashback is over, you then have this meditation realm test where Jaro Tapal appears before Cal, and you attack him 3 or 4 times, like with sequences of attacks, and Jaro is taunting Cal constantly, and eventually Cal rushes his saber through the illusion of Jaro Tapal, because Cal believes that he was responsible for Jaro Tapal's death, and this test is basically, in this instance, Cal failing to reconcile that Jaro Tapal's death was not his fault. But when he snaps out of that vision, his lightsaber breaks. And so he gets out of Kujit's tomb following the breakage of his master's lightsaber, and someone who you will encounter when you first arrive on Dathomir is a Wanderer. That's literally the name he goes by initially, but following this encounter in the tomb, he discards his robe just outside of it, and it turns out he is a fallen Jedi by the name of Taran Malicos. And another character who pops up throughout your journey on Dathomir is a lone Night Sister by the name of Merrin, and she, on this particular occasion, summons all of her undead sisters to attack Cal and Malicos, and with no lightsaber, Cal is completely defenseless, and there's a last-minute rush to the Mantis in-game, and then we get a cinematic mainly focusing on Cal and Sia. General, do you want to explain Sia's backstory?
So, Seer's backstory, basically, she was a Jedi Master and trained, and her Padawan was somebody named Trilla. And those that paid attention know that Trilla became the second sister. And yeah, well, Siri pretty much was forced to surrender Trilla to the Empire, and the Empire completely tortured and interrogated the second sister to the point in which they turned Trilla into an Inquisitor. And when Siri saw that, she was absolutely angry and lashed out and used the dark side to pretty much try to get out of there. And from that, she cut herself off from the Force. So yeah, that pretty much happened, and yeah, it's definitely one tragic backstory. Though I think what made me the most tragic in terms, what made me actually be kind of sad seeing was the Order 66 flashback with Cal and Jaro Tapal trying to escape. That actually was the one that the moment in the story that actually got me the most. So I actually really like that. Bonus points for using the actual Order 66 song from episode 3. So bonus points on that. But yeah, and Luke, continue.
Yeah, so after a few instances prior in the story of Sia being very guarded towards Cal with her backstory and why she cut herself off from the Force, the breakage of Cal's lightsaber basically necessitated that Sia come clean because of Cal blaming himself for being supposedly responsible for Jaro Tapal's death. And after coming completely clean to Cal about everything that happened on her end, Sia motivates Cal to get back up on his feet, and his first step to reconciling with his past is to reconstruct his lightsaber, which takes us to Ilum.
Ilum.
Yes. So if you look very closely at Ilan's orbit view, I think that's the correct term for it, you'll notice that it looks very similar to a certain something from the new canon, basically confirming that it was converted into a super weapon.
Oh, Christ on a mighty pedestal. Ugh. So basically, this is Starkiller Base. Great.
hmm
Ugh.
So Cal is and the rest of the Mantis crew, they go to Ilan in order for our lead character to face this trial and acquire a new lightsaber crystal and to ultimately reconstruct it. And it's probably, it's a very interesting part of the game narrative wise, but it's not the funnest from a gameplay perspective because you don't have, because of course your lightsaber is not available to you for most of it. Ilum is, there's still a lot of the age old platforming, but it's a little bit more puzzle oriented than other parts of the game, would you agree?
Hmm. I guess you could say that. Yeah, it's definitely more puzzle oriented. Not much enemies until later on.
Mm. And eventually you get to the other end of the cave where the ground gives way, Cal falls into water, and he is saved by a vision of his younger self, and that's when he makes it to the other end of the cave where his saber crystal is. And what happens to his crystal when he finally gets it, General?
It cuts into two.
People, he picks it up, looks at it for just a few seconds, and then it splits. And he thinks that all hope is lost. But then BD1 shows a very hopeful message between himself and Eno Cordova. Something that is only revealed now is that BD1 had no idea when he first met Cal as to what was going on or what the greater mission was or anything like that. And it's here at this stage that we find out Eno Cordova actually locked all of BD1's memory bank in order to protect that information. And Eno Cordova just knew that BD1 would eventually find the right companion who was trustworthy to reveal all this information to, and Cal just happened to be the one. And this moment not only further strengthens their friendship, but it gives Cal the strength he needs to finish the reforging of his lightsaber, and we get one of the coolest things gameplay wise that I think a Star Wars game has ever allowed us to do, simply because it's not the first time we've been able to do it in a Star Wars game, but it's the first time we've been able to do it in a very interactive way. We get to choose the color of our new saber crystal.
Yeah, so the reason why that happens is because since this is Star Wars, it relies on the kyber crystals, which basically you makes it so that the color you choose reflects your personality and what you think. So that's the in-universe reason why. But obviously for gameplay purposes, it's just for cosmetics. So that's pretty much why. Now, obviously, canonically, it's blue, the actual color of Cal Kestis' lightsaber. So, but yeah, you can pretty much choose whatever color you want.
You get blue, green, orange, purple, magenta, yellow, cyan, and indigo. Is that all of them? Blue, green, orange, purple, yellow, magenta, cyan, indigo.
Yeah. Now, granted, it's not the first time in the entire game you can change the lightsaber color, but you get more options for what colors to change with the new crystals. So before, you could actually just change green and yellow and blue, yeah, of course. And but now you can actually choose between 6 colors.
Orange was, see, this is the funny thing. Orange was a colour initially for people who had pre-ordered the game and redeemed their pre-order codes. But guess what Respawn eventually did?
They put it for free.
In an update, all of the pre-order stuff. So the BD1 skin, the black and yellow BD1 skin, the gold Mantis skin, and the orange as a lightsaber blade color. Yeah, all of those things were eventually given to players for free in an update.
Lol, so pre-ordering was worthless.
Oh, and there were even 2 entire lightsaber hilts, like complete hilts, that were pre-order bonuses. So yeah, those were included in that update too.
Lol, that's something. So much for pre-ordering. The game was useless to pre-order back then, and it certainly became useless later on. So yeah.
Just for giggles, what colours did you guys choose come that point in the game?
Blue.
Oh, you stuck with blue.
Blue.
That's
Wow. It looked like for my very first playthrough I stuck with blue, but I've definitely varied it on several playthroughs since. But yeah, so Cal reconstructs his saber, and it's admittedly at that point that I usually take the liberty to fully customize my saber as I would like it. And yeah, you fight your way back to the Mantis, and including a couple of ATSTs in the landing site, which isn't the first time you encounter ATSTs. You get them on Zepho and Kashyyyk as well. But you also fight along the way the K2 units, as in the same droid series as K2SO from Rogue One.
Oh, speaking of Rogue One, Saw Gerrera was also in Kashyyyk. Forgot to mention that.
Yeah, there are all sorts of little, Easter eggs, and for the Star Wars fandom, particularly those who follow the Disney canon. So yeah, you, as I say, you fight your way through LM, and you then return. Yeah, that's when you return to Dathomir. You go straight to Kujit's tomb this time around. Not only do you need the double jump, but you also need climbing claws, because there's a specific surface on Dathomir that you can only climb with those climbing claws, and you don't get those until your first visit to Dathomir. Well, your first visit when the game allows you to. Yeah. Sadly, you can't sequence break Dathomir despite the game initially alluding that to you.
And not to mention its DNA being Metroidvanias, which those really like their sequence breaking. In fact, Metroid Prime in the GameCube version had plenty of it. So, yeah, they think there will be some sequence breaking, but nah, no. This is definitely not very linear.
But yeah, so you go back to Kujit's tomb on Dathomir, you face Jaro Tapal, the illusion of him in that test, and you actually have to strike him with the new Saber Whirlwind attack that you get after Cal reconstructs his lightsaber, and then he says to you, "Impressive." You get a brief saber lock, you get out of it, and then he says, "But is power the answer?" And of course, power is not the Jedi way. And Cal, he sheathes his lightsaber to his belt. Jaro rushes forward, and Cal just says to his master, "Your loss has become a part of me. I will honor your teaching and your sacrifice." And in that moment, Cal had passed the test, and Jaro just says, "Remember, persistence reveals the path." So you fight a few more Night Brothers after that, and progressing further into the tomb, we get our first civil conversation between Cal and Merrin, or in which Merrin reveals to Cal that she was only a child during the Night Sister massacre that occurred during the Clone Wars.
TCW.
She even says, "An armoured warrior brandishing this descended upon us and cut down my people." Of course, if you've seen TCW, you know who that was.
Grievous?
Yes. So after that, in order to see whether or not Cal is a Jedi in the way one should be, or just a twisted liar like Malicos, she decides to watch Cal confront Malicos. And the two of them initially have a conversation about the failings of the Jedi way, but that there's still hope. But Malicos doesn't see it that way, and thinks that he and Cal could create something new, something better. But Cal refuses, and Malicos then says, "Then Dathomir will be your grave." And that's where we get the Taron Malicos boss fight.
Oh, yeah. It was hard, but I managed to beat him in the 4th try. Yeah, still not as hard as Dark Souls 3.
Of course. So yeah, there's kind of two parts to that, and in the second half, that Merrin will step in and occasionally help out by stunning Malicos, but eventually you wear him down, and in the post boss fight cutscene, Merrin seals Malicos' fate by burying him deep within the ground with the Night Sister magics.
Yep.
But then you go to the absolute farthest point of Kujit's tomb's interior, and you find the Astrium, which was something that was originally on Kashyyyk, but it had been moved to Dathomir for some reason. And Cal says to Merrin, "This could be the key to the next generation of Jedi." And Merrin says, "I'm happy for you and your Jedi, but nothing can bring back my people." And the two eventually find solace and common ground in the fact that they're survivors. And Merrin says she'd be interested in joining the Mantis crew, which is exactly what happens. But of course, with this being very late into the game and Merrin only just joining the fold, Grease and Seer make it clear that she will have to earn their trust.
Yep. And they pretty much leave Dathomir, but then they make one stop on Bogano to try to get the holocron.
The Astrium is taken to the vault on Bogano, which is where you go at the very beginning of the game, and Cal experiences another test.
The vision where basically he's like in the future training the new Jedi Order, but then turns out that his students are being ambushed by the Empire and they're forced into hiding. So it's a test to see if he's fit to lead Jedi Order and also make a new one. And as we now know, no, he was not destined to be one. It was Luke Skywalker who was meant to be the one, especially after the Empire was destroyed. But of course, Disney Star Wars, we know. Oh god, that only makes Cal destroying the holocron a bit kind of stupid now I think about it, because I mean, yes, you're gonna have the students, but he's not gonna make the new Jedi Order. Okay, Luke's gonna do it, and yeah, how did that go?
Not very well.
Ugh. You know, this is one of the times where I actually were not counting the sequel trilogy in the canon works to enjoy the game, because you just think how much the fucking story's screwed up. So, yeah, but anyway, so that flash happens, the test in which basically he's to see if he's fit to bring the Jedi Order or not. But Cal is ambushed by, well, the second sister, Trilla. And they fight briefly, and Trilla tricks Cal into getting the awful flashback of what happened in the backstory between Trilla and Siri, and that allows Trilla to escape the holocron. So, and then that pretty much makes it so that they have to go after Trilla. And where did they go, Luke?
To the literal base of the Inquisitors. The Fortress Inquisitorius on the planet of Noah? Is that how you say it?
So the Fortress Inquisitorius is basically on the planet Nor.
And with Nor, well, actually, I'll say this when we cover it from a gameplay perspective. So when the Mantis crew arrive on the orbit space of Nor, Merrin actually conceals the ship with Night Sister magics.
Yeah, so for those that aren't aware, or maybe you are, because TCW is part of Disney Star Wars, The Night Sisters and Datomir are not the same as in the expanded universe. In fact, they straight up use fantasy-esque magic in TCW and Disney Star Wars. So compared to the witches Datomir in the U, where they just use the Force. They just didn't call it the Force, and they use it through spells of sorts. So yeah, and here just straight up fantasy-esque magic. So yeah, and when I saw that in this game, by the way, that just further convinced me that I was like, yeah, this is fantasy magic. This is not the Force at work, just not. So yeah, so just leaving that little tidbit there. So yeah. Anyway, look, finish off the Inquisitorius.
Very well. So Merrin conceals the ship with magic. Cal and Seer agree to go down to the Fortress Inquisitorius together, and this is where the gameplay begins. You swim into the base, and with this being the final act of the game's story, it's a one and done scenario. You cannot replay this part of the story or even revisit the Fortress Inquisitorius to explore once you've played through this story segment. So you swim into the base, and from then on you're pretty much just taking on the typical Imperial fodder by this point. One thing I will say, and this was probably done for balancing reasons, Fortress Inquisitorius is literally the only territory of the game where enemies don't respawn if you rest at the meditation points.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see why. Because if you can't leave the place, then yeah, makes sense. Why the hell would you want to have those enemies respawning in the last area? Yeah.
And we also, and you end up going through quite a few areas. You go through water tunnels. There's actually an Imperial dojo. There's a huge cell room, and we actually get a small parallel to the Order 66 flashbacks with Jara Tapol, where you interact with a console and you see Seer taking out some Purge troopers with Trilla's Inquisitor lightsaber. But you eventually make your way to the Fortress Inquisitorius torture chamber, and there is one more boss fight to go against Trilla. And this is by far the most difficult boss fight against her, because unlike all of the previous times that you faced her, she actually throws flashbangs into the mix, as well as a really, really annoying attack that she usually employs right after throwing the flashbangs, where she will dash at you, grab you, and then do the Kylo Ren style mind invasion that really makes the head hurt, and then she'll just kick you, and that attack does a lot of damage to you. A lot of damage.
Yeah, it does a lot of damage. It even takes some of your force out, actually. It did kill me that attack 2 times, so yeah.
Either way, you eventually beat Trilla, and Cal takes the holocron. Seer and Trilla reconcile, but then immediately after that, guess who shows up?
Oh, yes. The man in black. The black cyborg. Darth Vader. Dun, dun,
Yes.
dun.
It's an incredible moment for those that weren't spoiled of it. And yeah, I'm going to throw shade at EA here, because the game hadn't even been out for a month as far as I know, but an advert over in the States for Fallen Order was playing during a halftime NFL show or something like that.
Yeah.
And said advert had a snippet of Vader at the very end. What were you doing, EA? You were so close to pulling off a perfect streak, and you had to throw that in.
Well, EA sometimes likes to spoil stuff, so yeah. And yeah, so they escape from Vader, manage to get out, and Cal and the rest of the gang, they are seeing the holocron in the Mantis ship, but Cal decides to destroy it, and pretty much, well, they decide to just leave it up to fate, and then now he asks where to go to, and that's where it ends. So yeah, that's pretty much how it went. So what do you guys think of this ending? The Django, what do you think of that ending, the final act?
Well, I just love that ending with Vader in the end appearing, and just foreshadowing with just leaving that open-ended for the next game. So yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I liked it.
Indeed. Look.
When I first played the game, I was a bit disappointed with the encounter with Vader being the way it was, mainly because I was expecting a proper boss fight. You know, I thought, and again, this is when the game had just come out, so we only had Fallen Order itself to go by. I thought Fallen Order was going to have not only Vader in it, but end in a way where either one, you would beat Vader from a gameplay perspective, but Vader would kill Cal in the post-boss fight cutscene, or it would be an all-out no-win scenario where regardless of how much damage you did to Vader, you physically couldn't win. So think the ending of Halo Reach, but obviously on a far more intimate scale and situation. But knowing where this story goes in the next game, I can see why Cal and Cia survived.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I liked it. Yes, I already knew that Darth Vader was at the end, so I wasn't really too surprised that much. And I actually was surprised that it wasn't the boss battle. I didn't actually know that it wasn't the boss battle and it was an escape sequence. I didn't know that. That was pretty cool. So the whole fight was pretty cool, and against Trill as the final boss, it was also pretty cool. And yeah, like I enjoyed it. So it was indeed pretty awesome. And Fortress Inquisitors itself, pretty linear, pretty much what you'd expect from the final level, especially. Oh yeah, considering the inspiration of this game, that yeah makes sense. So yeah, and yeah, it was great, indeed. I do got a comment on the voice actor of Darth Vader being Scott Lawrence. You know, the same guy that made Darth Vader voice in Star Wars Battlefront 2, 2005, and even Empire at War, like, and a few other Star Wars games from the 90s. Like, yeah, that's how far back he is, and it is pretty surprising because the last time we saw him do Darth Vader voice was in Empire at War, 2006, and it took until Vader Immortal, the freaking Vader VR game, for him to return. So like that is, wow, took a long while, but hey, we welcome your return, Scott Lawrence, voicing the Man in Black. So yeah, what do you guys think of that?
As someone who had played in earlier childhood years, the likes of the Revenge of the Sith game and the original Battlefront 2 and things like this, hearing Scott Lawrence and recognizing that Darth Vader voice again was a bit of a nostalgia trip for me. And I think time has served his voice well as far as tonal qualities, because I think his voice nowadays is a lot closer to James Earl Jones than it was in the mid-2000s. Would you guys agree?
I think so, yeah. The Django, what do you think?
Yeah, he was pretty good. It can't beat James Earl Jones, of course, but for what he did, I thought it was pretty good, and yeah, I liked it.
Okay, yeah, it was great to see him. So the Django, now what do you think of the ending?
It's definitely pretty good, and let's just say for Jedi Survivor, you think it will be like a completely different game, which is a good thing almost at the same time. So you'll find out, like, a lot of things have changed since then. So it's not going to be right after the events of Jedi Fallen Order. It's like 4 years later, I think, then Jedi Survivor starts from that point on. So it's not immediately after that game. So it's much different in that aspect.
It's actually 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, and okay. So anything else to mention on the final act?
I will say that Dathomir was probably the scariest bit in the beginning, because I actually remember going to Dathomir pretty early and actually facing that one creature. It wasn't a boss battle, but I don't even know the name of the creatures and the enemies and stuff, but there was one enemy that you faced pretty early on, and it would just absolutely destroy me. So when I went to it later, then I got the hang of it, but it was still like, yeah, I'm gonna come back to Dathomir much later because this is something's not right.
That's something. Yeah. Okay. Well, anything else to say, Luke?
It was a very enjoyable final act, and yeah, it was a real blood pumper, especially experiencing it first time around.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Okay. Well, now let's get into the conclusion of the game. So, who goes first?
So, final things about the game, I will say that it's a fantastic game as its own thing, and I'm glad it had a sequel, and it's gonna have another sequel for sure. And was a successful game, and proved EA wrong about single player games not being successful, not being good, and it sold very well and did very well. Everyone enjoyed the hell out of the game. It's not perfect by any means. It's not the best Star Wars game, but for what it did, it definitely opened people's eyes to what Star Wars can be again for the Star Wars, game stuff. What Star Wars games can be, and built it up from there. And then they did the sequel years later, and we'll see how they do with the trilogy. The third game. But now it's like we can expect, hopefully, other developers out there to emulate the success, so not copying the same exact game, but creating their own successful Star Wars game, and we'll see. We'll just see how everything goes from there.
Mm. Okay, Luke.
Okay, so Fallen Order is not, by any stretch of the imagination, the most groundbreaking game on the planet. It is a kit bash, albeit a rather good kit bash, of several properties and games that have come before. But what it manages to do off the back of what came before, I think was rather remarkable when you consider how low consumer trust was in Star Wars games at that time, especially of course, with EA at the helm. And yeah, Django, you're absolutely right. The fact that this game made EA eat their words about the whole people don't like single player games anymore. What utter nonsense is that? And with Survivor out now, I really hope that game takes full advantage of Fallen Order's foundations and makes something truly special. But with Fallen Order itself, it is, as I say, don't go into it expecting the most groundbreaking thing ever, but it is a fun time, and that's all a game needs to be.
Okay. Now, as for me, I really enjoyed the game. It was a great experience. It definitely was way better than Dark Souls 3. And I was pretty damn happy seeing just how much it took from my second favorite video game of all time, Metroid Prime. So, anytime a game takes plenty of inspiration from Metroid, in particular Metroid Prime, yeah, it will always put a smile on my face. So, yeah, I definitely had plenty of smiles when playing this one. And yeah, and I was happy it was not as difficult as Dark Souls, so thank God for that. And so, yeah, it was enjoyable, it was awesome, and yeah, I can't wait to play the sequel. And yeah, indeed. And as for when that podcast, the second game come out, we'll see when. We won't put a specific release date yet, but it is definitely one thing we will do in the future. So yeah. And yeah, with that said, well, it's definitely a great game. Played on any version that you got. PC, you're going to have to deal with Origin, but at the very least, it is still a good game. Oh, play it with 60 frames per second. Playing it at 30 frames per second in the PS4 Xbox One is going to be a fucking hassle because in Dark Souls games, playing at 30 is going to be more problematic when it comes to parrying and dodging. So definitely you need that very smooth 60 FPS to make your actions and movements a lot smoother and more easily readable. Okay, so 60 frames per second all the way for Jedi Fallen Order. I cannot stress that enough. 60 FPS. Played on PS5, Xbox Series X, or PC. Go with those. Don't go for last gen. because you're gonna have a more frustrating experience with that. So, yeah, can't stress that enough. Okay, so with that said, yeah, well, this has been the Jedi Fallen Order podcast, and we'll see you guys on the next State of Star Wars video. Bye bye.
See you guys.
May the force be with you.